If you've ever struggled with crooked top stitching, invisible zippers that show, or slippery fabrics that bunch up under your needle, you're not alone. Today, I'm sharing 5 presser feet that'll transform your sewing from frustrating to flawless, and I'm saving my absolute favorite, most game-changing foot for last. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which feet to invest in first and how they'll solve the specific problems that have been holding back your sewing. And yes, these work on almost any sewing machine, so there's no excuse not to upgrade your toolkit. Let's start with the invisible zipper foot, because this little game changer will make you wonder how you ever lived without it. You know that feeling when you're inserting an invisible zipper and you can barely see where you're stitching? You're guessing where the seam line is, trying to get close enough to those coils without hitting them, and half the time you end up with a zipper that's either too loose or you've sewn right over the teeth. I've been there, and it's maddening. Here's what makes this foot so brilliant. On the bottom, it has 2 deep grooves that fit perfectly over your zipper coils. Think of it like railroad tracks. Those grooves guide the foot along the zipper while keeping your needle positioned exactly where it needs to be. Instead of wrestling with the zipper and hoping for the best, you're gliding along with precision. The magic happens because this foot lets you get incredibly close to the coils without actually hitting them. Your regular zipper foot just can't do this. With a standard foot, you're always playing it safe, staying further from the coils, which means your zipper shows more than it should. Here's my technique. First, I press my zipper tape away from the teeth, just like you normally would. Then I position the right side of my zipper coil in that right groove of the foot. The foot naturally wants to nestle right up against those teeth, so I let it. Now when I stitch, I'm getting right up next to the coils in the seam line, which means when I close that zipper, it truly disappears into the seam. If you sew garments, bags, pillows, or anything that needs a closure, this foot will pay for itself on your very first project. The confidence you'll feel when that zipper lays perfectly flat is worth every penny. And by the way, if you want to learn even more about invisible zippers, we have a whole workshop to help you, so I'll link that below. Next up is the 1/4 inch foot, and this one's going to change how you think about precision in sewing. How many times have you tried to sew a perfect 1/4 inch seam and ended up with something that's more like 3/8 here and 3/16 there? Or attempted top stitching that starts straight but somehow wanders off course by the end of the seam. This happens because you're trying to eyeball the distance from your needle to the edge of your fabric. And frankly, that's really hard to do consistently. The 1/4 inch foot takes all the guesswork out. The right edge of this foot sits exactly a 1/4 inch from your needle. So all you have to do is keep your fabric edge aligned with the edge of the foot, and boom, perfect 1/4 inch seams every single time. But here's where it gets really useful. This foot isn't just for quilters, although they absolutely love it. If you're making French seams, you need that first 1/4 inch seam to be precise, or your finished seam won't lay flat. If you're doing decorative top stitching, this foot keeps that line perfectly parallel to your edge. And if you're adding binding or trim, that consistent 1/4 inch distance makes all the difference between looking polished and looking rushed. I especially love using this foot when I'm working with multiple layers. You know how binding can shift as you're sewing it? The 1/4 inch foot keeps everything aligned because you're using the foot as your guide, not trying to watch the needle and the fabric edge at the same time. One thing to keep in mind, this foot works best when your fabric edges are clean and straight. If you're working with curves or you haven't trimmed your seam allowances evenly, you'll need to pay a bit more attention. But for straight seams and top stitching, this foot is absolutely foolproof. Now let's talk about the button foot, because if you've ever spent 20 minutes trying to sew on a single button by hand, this is going to feel like magic. Personally, I do not like sewing buttons on by hand. First of all, it takes forever. Second, I always find that my threads get tangled. And third, buttons are usually one of the last steps in sewing, so I often find myself rushing at that point. When you sew buttons on by machine, you save your time and sanity without sacrificing quality. In fact, the buttons will be more consistent and actually work better. Let me explain why. The button foot clamps your button in place and keeps it from shifting while you zigzag through the holes. It's specially designed to hold the button firmly, so you can place the button exactly where it needs to go with no worry about slipping. Here's another cool feature. My Bernina button foot has this little middle toe that lands between the holes of the button. The zigzag stitches go over the spacer, creating some extra lift. This gives the buttons a little extra space to account for the thickness of the fabric you'll be buttoning through. In other words, it creates a thread shank. Pretty cool, huh? Now the button foot that works with your machine might not have that little toe, but don't worry, you can also just insert a toothpick between the holes to give your button a little more room to move. Set your machine to a zigzag stitch that's just wide enough to go through your buttonholes, usually about 3 to 4 millimeters. Keep your stitch length at 0, so you're just going back and forth, not moving forward. I like to start by hand cranking the first 1 or 2 stitches, just to make sure my width is set correctly. I've cracked quite a few buttons by diving in without double checking like this, and that can spell disaster when you have the exact number of buttons you need. Take about 8 to 10 stitches, then switch back to a straight stitch. Keep your stitch length at 0, so you're just going back and forth, not moving forward. Move your needle back over a hole and do a few tiny stitches in place to lock everything down. Some machines also have a setting for sewing on buttons that sets all this for you automatically. The button foot can also be used to sew on other 3D embellishments like sequins or bows. Next is the Edgestitch Foot, which might just become your most used specialty presser foot once you see what it can do. This foot looks similar to the 1/4-inch foot, but is designed for much more precise work. The key feature is that vertical metal plate that extends down from the foot. That plate acts like a fence, running along the edge of your fabric or fold and keeping your stitching perfectly parallel. The most obvious use is edge stitching. You know, that line of stitching that you see running close to the edge of collars, cuffs, waistbands, and top stitch seams. Without this foot, you're trying to keep your needle a consistent distance from the edge by eye, and that's surprisingly difficult. Your attention is split between feeding the fabric and watching the needle position, and something always suffers. With the Edgestitch Foot, you position that metal guide right against your edge or fold, and your needle automatically stays in the perfect position. You can adjust exactly where your needle falls by moving it left or right. Most machines let you adjust needle position, which gives you complete control over how close to the edge you want to stitch. But here's where this foot really shines. Hemming. When you fold and press a hem, you can use the Edgestitch Foot to stitch it down from the wrong side of the garment. That vertical plate runs right along the fold, keeping your stitching line perfectly straight and ensuring you catch the hem evenly all the way across. No more places where you miss the hem, no more wavy top stitching. You can also use this foot for stitching in the ditch. That's when you stitch right in the seam line where two pieces join together. The metal guide sits right in that valley created by the seam, and your stitching becomes practically invisible from the right side. And here's a technique I love for joining pieces with a zigzag stitch. Position your two fabric edges so they just touch, with the metal guide running between them. Set your machine to a narrow zigzag, and you'll create this beautiful join that's perfect for things like fleece or felt, where you don't want bulk from overlapped seam allowances. The versatility of the Edgestitch Foot means you'll find yourself reaching for it almost every project. It's one of those tools that makes the difference between sewing that looks carefully crafted and sewing that looks rushed. Speaking of putting these feet to work, we have two brand new patterns that are perfect for practicing these techniques. Lars is this gorgeous pair of cigarette pants designed for stretch wovens, and they close with an invisible side zipper, exactly what that invisible zipper foot was made for. Plus, they have the sophisticated welt pocket with a button closure on the back, so you could practice with both the invisible zipper foot and the button foot on one project. That Edgestitch Foot would be perfect for top stitching those double fold hems. We also have Idra, this stunning woven wrap with billowing long sleeves and this beautiful V neckline. The front bodice is lined with these radiating pleats that create such elegant shaping, and the back neckline is finished with bias tape, another place you could use that Edgestitch Foot. Both patterns are available right now exclusively to Seamwork members. If you're not a member yet, you can join at seamwork.com and get access to both patterns right away, plus our entire library of modern sewing patterns. I'll put the link in the description below. Now let's talk about the walking foot, because this one's going to solve problems you might not even realize you have yet. Your sewing machine's feed dogs, those little metal teeth under your presser foot, do a great job of moving a single layer of fabric through the machine. But when you're working with multiple layers, especially if they're slippery or stretchy, the top layer can shift and bunch up while the bottom layer moves along smoothly. You end up with puckers, uneven seams, and layers that don't line up at the end. The walking foot solves this by adding what amounts to a second set of feed dogs on top. It's like having hands gently pulling your fabric from above while the regular feed dogs push from below. Both layers move at exactly the same speed, which means they stay aligned perfectly. This is absolutely essential if you're sewing with knits. I cannot stress this enough. If you work with knit fabrics, this foot will change your life. Knits have this annoying tendency to get pulled down into the throat plate, especially lightweight ones like jersey or modal. They stretch and distort, they form these horrible puckers, and sometimes they even jam up your machine completely. With the walking foot, your knits glide through smoothly without stretching or distorting. The foot holds them gently in place while the dual feed action keeps everything moving evenly. You get flat, smooth seams that'll leave you feeling impressed with yourself. But the walking foot isn't just for knits. If you're trying to match plaids or stripes across the seam, this foot keeps the layers from shifting so your patterns line up perfectly. When you're quilting and working with batting between two layers of fabric, the walking foot prevents that sandwich from getting bunched up and puckered. And it works beautifully with slippery fabrics like silk or rayon. These fabrics love to slip and slide around, making it really hard to sew a straight seam. The walking foot grips both layers gently but firmly, so they move together as one unit instead of sliding around independently. One thing to remember, the walking foot is a bit bulkier than your regular foot, so it doesn't work quite as well for tight curves or intricate detail work. But for straight seams and gentle curves, it's unbeatable for smooth, even stitching. I know some people even leave their walking foot on pretty much all the time. The walking foot also has this guide bar that you can use for quilting parallel lines. Set the bar to your desired distance, run it along your previous line of stitching, and you'll get perfectly spaced quilting lines every time. And speaking of tools that make sewing easier, you won't believe the sewing supplies I discovered at the hardware store that work better than expensive specialty tools and cost a fraction of the price. Watch this video next to see the genius finds that'll upgrade your sewing toolkit without breaking your budget.